All right. Hello out there, all you headbanging heroes and heroines. It's that time again. My name is Alan, and let's talk metal. The video I'm making tonight is a response video. Devon over on the Maze of Torment channel sort of asked for more YouTube metal content creators to do videos about some of their favorite demos. He recently posted a really good one about some of his favorites. So I figured, hey, challenge accepted. That's a great idea for a topic, and I'll follow up on that and show off some of my favorite demos. A few things to mention before I start through the list here. These are in no particular order, and I'm not saying these are my top 10 or top 12 demos of all time. These are just 12 I picked off the list that I really like, think they're worth mentioning. I have about 400 demos total in my collection, but a lot of them are digital copies or copies that are on CD anthologies. I don't collect original demos, cassette tapes, not really my thing. So I'm only going to show a few original tapes, but I did try to pick things where I've got some physical item to show to go with it. I'll probably do another video another time on some more great demos that I want to have to pull up some pictures for because I just don't have any physical medium to show of those. So without further ado, let's start through the list. I'm going to start with a few heavier things, and then we'll probably look at some traditional stuff as well. So one that I've got to mention when talking about favorite demos is, of course, something by Armored Angel, and I'm going to cheat here a little bit and mention two of their demos, Wings of Death and Communion. These came out in 1989 and 1990. They're very similar in style. I think you could put these together and make one hell of sort of a blackened thrash metal in the vein of Early Destruction. I've done a separate video on Armored Angel, so I'm not going to talk about these a lot. I love the band, obsess over them a little bit, and all the material is really great. These are the demos that kind of introduced the classic lineup of Lucy and the Green brothers, Matt and Joel Green. So it really put them sort of on the map and established them as the godfathers of Australian extreme heavy metal. So gotta mention those demos on any list of my favorite demos. Which, something else then, next up on the list, again from the more extreme end of things, is Eternus's Walk My Path demo. Now, this is not the demo. This is just their first EP, Dark Sorcery. I don't have a physical copy of Walk My Path, but definitely wanted to mention it. It's a very good demo, and it's similar in style to the material on Dark Sorcery. Eternus, if you're not familiar with them, their early material had a really cool sound. It was fairly unique in my experience. They blended a lot of elements from doom, death, and black, and even a little bit of war metal in terms of the themes. The vocals were very low, very guttural, so it had sort of a death metal feel, but the songs tended to be either very slow with almost a marching beat, or they would go into very furious riffing sometimes. And some of the stuff tended to have a very sort of thick, gauzy production to it. So it just had layers and layers of atmosphere. So yeah, the early Eterna stuff is very, very good. After their second album, they started drifting more and more into what I'd say is a more straightforward death metal style, which they did okay, but I feel like they really lost their unique sound after the first couple of albums. But yeah, some of the songs from the Walk My Path demo have been included on different reissues of their early albums over the years. So you can find the material fairly easy. You don't have to track down the original demo. I just didn't have anything that has all the demo tracks on it together. So Eternus, definitely worth checking out if sort of darkened, doomy death war metal. If all those words being crammed together sounds interesting, give it a shot. All right, one more from the really heavy end of the spectrum that should definitely get mentioned is the early material by Hellhammer, Satanic Rites, and the other demos that go with that. These have been reissued over the years. This is the 3 CD Demon Entrail set that was done about, this has been over 10 years now. Time flies when you're banging your head. But yeah, I really like a lot of the early Hellhammer stuff. Yes, it's got a very raw, primitive sound. No one's going to claim it's the best recorded material in history or the most insightful, but it definitely has a certain charm to it. And of course, it went on to inspire a huge number of bands and different styles. So, yep, you can get reissues of this stuff too. I've got just older pressings. Now, these are bootlegs, but they also were put out for a while. These picture discs floated around. I got these from King Fowley, 20 years ago now. Time flies when you're banging your head a lot. But yeah, so this one's a copy of Satanic Rites. They did about 333 copies of each of these. And the other one, if I can pick it up off the shelf here, is Triumph of Death. So they've got that one as well. Again, obviously, they're demo quality recordings. It's Hellhammer. You're not listening to it for sonic fidelity or anything like that. But I feel it's definitely worth mentioning on, some of the really, really great demos out there. All right, so let's change gears a little bit and talk about some more traditional heavy metal bands from the 80s. I'm going to start with one from overseas, and that is Sweden's Jonah Quiz. Jonah Quiz, I've put a couple of songs up in another video by this band on one of my Let's Hear Metal videos, so you can check it out there. I won't play a sound clip on this one. But this was an excellent Swedish band. They were in that first wave of Swedish heavy metal in the early 1980s. They did a couple of demos, and their 1982 demo is just stellar. Great sound, great songwriting. And interestingly, sort of their footnote in the metal archives is that the vocals were done by a very young Johan Landquist, who of course would later do the session vocals on Candlemass's Epicus Doomicus Metallicus, and then here just recently would rejoin the band on their latest release. So this is an anthology put together by Stormspell Records back in 2009, I think. It includes their early demo stuff. There's a more recent anthology put out on Cult Metal Classics that also has the demos, I think, with one or two more lost songs. So good stuff. They do sing in Swedish. So if that is a big hang-up for you, then that would be an issue listening to these. Unless you speak Swedish, you're not going to have any idea what they're saying. The music on this one is so good, it doesn't matter what they're singing in. They could be singing in Klingon, and I would still listen to it because the songs are incredibly good. So again, you can check that out over on my Let's Hear Metal, I think it's Volume 5 video that I just put up not too long ago. All right, let's move into some US bands from the 80s then. And a few of these I've got song clips that we'll check out since a few of them are kind of obscure. First one I wanted to mention was Chicago's Enforcer. This band, despite the name, doesn't really have any ties to Queensryche. They're not playing that style of metal at all. The style they're playing is sort of a very dark, slightly doom-tinged traditional heavy metal. It is done very, very well. If you are familiar with the Metal Massacre Volume 4 compilation, these guys should have been on that compilation. They would have fit in perfectly. And the demo was from 1984, so it was kind of right in that same time slot. But yes, they would fit in right alongside bands like Witchslayer, who's on there. Those bands around Chicago, I'm guessing maybe they sort of influenced one another. They've got that sound that's reminiscent of early Trouble, where it's getting into that doomy style, not as slow and as heavy as something like Candlemass, but we definitely would think of it as sort of early doom metal by today's standards. And Enforcer does this really, really well. This anthology includes the 84 demo and a lot of other sort of various recordings they put together. It's another one on the Stormspell label. Stormspell has done a lot of these over the years. You can usually spot them because they always get really, really nice cover art for their releases. And yeah, this being a more obscure band, let's take a moment and check out a sample of the track High Treason. Okay, so that gives you a pretty good idea of what the band sounds like. Again, they've got that very heavy, chugging, doom-tinged sound, but it's got a lot of power to it still. It's not the sort of very slow, mournful style of doom metal. This is more like, I'm angry and I'm going to grind you under the foot of my boot kind of doom metal. Really cool band. Wish they had recorded more material back in the day. They had a lot of potential based on the recordings on that anthology. The anthology, by the way, if you missed it, it's just entitled Classic Chicago Metal. Not the most epic title, but it's very, very apt. Those Chicago bands from around that time were really good at this style. All right, next on the demo stack. Got to mention this demo. It's arguably my favorite of all time. It is the medieval metal demo by North Carolina's Overlord. A little biased because from down here in the Carolinas, doesn't hurt matters any. But these guys could be, from, South Central Bangladesh, and the demo would still rank as possibly the best of all time. Started out in the 70s as a cover band, and in the 80s they got changed more and more, did more original stuff. If you like the just really classic, clean sounding, kind of epic heavy metal, very popular with the European bands in particular from the 80s, you don't get much better than this. Amazing songwriting, very energetic, very catchy, good speedy stuff. They do go for a lot of the fantasy tropes and realms. So you've got songs and knights and realms and all that kind of stuff. But don't let that deter you. It's not cheesy. It's incredibly well executed. Won't play any samples here because, again, you can check this out over on one of my Let's Hear Metal videos. But yeah, both their demos are very, very good. The first one, though, Medieval Metal, is just classic. Got to have that one. And again, the band is still actually kicking around active, so you can order this directly from their website. It's not a hard anthology to click down. It is definitely worth the money. It doesn't have a ton of tracks on it, only about 8. They do have some other merch and stuff listed on their website, so hop over there, check them out. I'll try to remember to leave a link in the show notes below. All right, let's keep going, moving right along. This band I always liked. I thought they had a lot of potential. Sorry, nose is itchy. Not picking it, just a little itchy. This is a band out of Oklahoma, which isn't something you say very often in heavy metal. It is Oliver Magnum. I always felt like this was one of the great lost could have been stories, that these guys had a lot of potential and didn't quite get to that next level like they should have. Now, this is just a copy of their first album, but they made a demo in '86 that is really good. The first album here is good too. This came out a few years later though, and after they had changed vocalists. If you're not familiar with Oliver Magnum, don't feel bad. A lot of folks aren't. So before I gush about them a little bit, let's check out a sample here of Old World Nights. And the way this track gets going is just great. It's got one of the best speed metal openings I've ever heard. All right, so that gives you a good insight on what Oliver Magnum sounds like. Very tight, very fast, really good. How the heck they came up with that style and played that music in Oklahoma in the mid and late 80s? Don't know. One of the great unsolved mysteries of the heavy metal universe, I guess. Few footnotes on Oliver Magnum. The band got an inclusion on the Metal Massacre 9 volume compilation from Metal Blade Records. There are two good songs on that compilation, and Oliver Magnum is one of them. It's the Old World Nights that I just played off the demo. The compilation, though, yeah, after the first couple of songs, there's one more good one. I think the band is called Toxic. And after that, a lot of the material is pretty so-so. The series was way past its prime by the time you get to Volume 9. And actually, Overlord, I forgot to mention it, but had been on Metal Massacre Volume 8. And that one also is pretty hit or miss. So it gave the band some exposure from a bigger label, but not a lot of people were paying attention to those compilations by the time you got to those later volumes. So the band did get out the one album. They released some other stuff a little bit later in the early 90s, but it was changing direction. I know they did at least one demo there, but it was starting to sound more like early 90s American heavy metal. You can sense how I feel about that. Yay. Footnote on this one. The album does include the song Old World Nights, but it is a different version than the demo version that I just played. They had a different vocalist by this time, and the version on the album, it lacks that really high-pitched scream right when the band kicks into gear and gets going at the start of Old World Nights. It's still a good version on here, still sounds nice, but that demo version just really smokes. Can't beat that. They always had this weird mascot, kind of looks like Raymond Pettibonard or something. Funny looking, don't know, midget with a big gun. I don't know. He had mascots for heavy metal bands in the 1980s. It didn't always make sense. But anyway, last footnote on Oliver Magnum, the vocalist on the album here went on to be in the band Forte, who did some decent stuff in the early and mid 90s, which not a lot of American bands did at that time. They're not, most folks were doing death metal or Pantera metal by then. So Forte's never been my favorite, but I'll give them a little bit of a pass for giving it a good try at a time when that style of metal was very unpopular. Okay, enough about Oliver Magnum. Let's move on to another demo released in 1986. This is one that I got through download trading years ago, instantly fell in love with it, and the band eventually got an anthology put out, which I could not believe. I never saw anything listed about it, but thankfully I got a random copy of a Greek metal zine at one point, and there was an advertisement for this in it. I was just like, oh, hells no. They actually got an anthology splashed together. So I immediately had to go out and order Blind Assassin. If you've never heard of them, again, they didn't leave a lot of recorded material behind. They spliced together enough to make this one anthology collection. Let's check out a sample before I talk a bit about this great band.
destruction and the fire and brimstone its figure rose, the arm of slaughter given to war, first of a legacy put to the sword.
All right, so that gives you a pretty good idea of what Blind Assassin sounds like. Another band in that Enforcer vein of this sort of very dark, doomy, but powerful sounding traditional heavy metal with maybe just a pinch of Candlemass thrown in there where they're trying to do some of the vocal octaves and stuff. The demo had 3 tracks on it. Excellent material. All 3 are included on here. And again, they sound a lot like those Chicago bands, but these guys were actually from California, so not part of the Chicago scene, even though they very much had that style. This is another one that would have fit in on the Metal Massacre 4 compilation. So many of the bands on that comp have that same style of this just a very heavy, powerful, but kind of doom-tinged traditional metal on it. It's a compilation album you'll hear me talk about a lot over time. It's one of my favorites. So this comp anthology looks like it was put out Cult Metal Classics, and again, did a nice job on it. All right, let's keep moving. Got a few more I want to mention here. 1986. Some people consider it the greatest year of heavy metal, and you can reel off all kinds of big name releases by big name acts that came out that year. A lot of incredible demo stuff was getting pumped out in 86 as well. I probably would pick 1984 as the best year for heavy metal, but 86 can definitely make a case for itself. Next up, we have a demo from a band called Chalice. Now, this is not the Chalice I talked about in a previous video. The band I talked about in my US singles video, they were from the Cincinnati area and recorded a single in the early 80s, around 81. This band was from New Jersey, and they recorded their demo in 86. And I'm going to play a snippet of this, because it's not one that's well known. Let's see, I may jump forward just a little bit, because it has kind of a opening here. Give it a second, trust me. Let's do this thing. All right, that's a little bit of Seven Seas of Rye from Chalice's 1986 demo, One Final Sin. incredible sound from this band. That riffing is just ultra tight. It's got this swirling pattern to it. The vocalist is really, really good, as you heard there. He puts in a hell of a performance on this. Some folks will criticize a lot of 80s metal bands for not always having the best vocalist, that, you're getting together whatever few guys in town like this kind of music. You worked with what you had, but no, this guy's got some pipes, and they show on this demo. The second song, Reincarnation, is also great, and Egypt is also incredible. Top-notch demo. You don't get much better. I remember when this surfaced online in some of the MP3 trading forums, probably a decade or so ago. And then, yeah, once again, good old Stormspell Records got on this fast, tracked one of the guys down. Took them a while to work everything out, but they did, and this anthology collection is the result of it. Some of the other tracks they dug up to include, are a little rough sounding. Again, a lot of these things were recorded on very lo-fi equipment and stuff, but it's worth it just to have the 3 tracks off One Final Sin, even if none of these other songs are all that listenable, and they're not that bad. They just have sort of normal demo stuff. But yeah, One Final Sin, it's right up there with Overlord's medieval metal demo in my book. All right, just a couple more to go, and then we'll call it. This one also technically from 1986, although it also kind of spilled over into 87 in a weird way. This is the Annihilation Complete demo by Legends Anacrusis. This is one of those bands that some people haven't heard of. They're a bit underground, but those who know them tend to really, really put them very highly and rank their stuff way, way up there. This was a band that was very creative, had very excellent songwriting talent, good vocalist, excellent musicianship. They started out with this demo in 86, and again, this is an anthology from good old Stormspell. This demo has them operating in relatively standard thrash metal territory, but they're doing a very, very good job of it, and you already get hints that the band is going to be mixing things up a lot. The songs, are not just standard generic thrash tracks. They're not interchangeable with one another. So it was a very solid sounding demo. It was a pretty long demo. It's 7 tracks, over half an hour's worth of material. Of all the demos I've showed off, and of most of them I've listened to, very few of them ever really scream, this band needs to make an album right now. They're ready to do the full-length thing. Annihilation Complete is just like, just give these boys a record contract. They've basically already got an incredibly good record right here ready for you to release. They don't have to come up with 4 or 5 more songs to round this out. It's done. I mentioned this spilled over into 1987 because the demo ended up being re-recorded in 1987 when they were getting some interest from a few record labels. The copy they had recorded in 86, they'd been using it to run off, extra copies and send out to, people and fanzines, and basically had worn out the original copy. So the 87 demo is what most people ended up hearing, and it's the demo that Stormspell used for the release here. So yeah, Anacrusis on subsequent albums would move. I guess you'd say they're were a very progressive band. They always sort of had a thrash underpinning to their music, but their music became sort of more high-minded, not in a snooty way, and not in a overly technical, let's show off with all kinds of fancy scales and soloing way. Just in a very unique way. They really avoided a lot of the cliches of thrash bands. This wasn't a band where you were just going to throw on a black t-shirt and white sneakers and bang your head. You were going to listen to this and go deep with some of the lyrics and concepts these guys got into. I like some of their albums better than others, but even here on this early, what is relatively raw compared to most of their catalog, it's excellent stuff. A lot of the songs did get reused on their first full-length album called Suffering Hour. The whole catalog is worth exploring, especially if you like bands that can work outside the box a bit. And vocalist Kevin Nardi is still around and has released some stuff as recently, I think, as 2016 or so. So there's still some guys out there doing some quality stuff in this vein. All right, we've got 2 more that I'm going to mention here. Let's see. Next up, let's look at one of the lost gems on Metal Blade Records. That's the band Lethal. Now, somebody was mentioning this in one of their YouTube videos not too long ago. I think it may have been Marty over at the Marty Worm channel. Lethal released this one album on Metal Blade in 1990 called Programmed. Not the greatest cover art in the history of heavy metal, let's be fair. But the music on it is very, very good. They're operating in that Queensryche style of traditional heavy metal. Clean vocals, strong singer, songs that, they're not going to be the fastest or heaviest, but they're very well written, well composed, well executed. It's an excellent album. It just came out too late to catch most people's attention. And, within another year or two, people were looking at very different styles of metal. Lethal released, I think it was just an EP several years later, and yeah, they completely changed directions to try to keep up with the times, because that always works out so well for so many bands. But this is a great album if you like those, Queensryche style bands. But again, this video is about demos, and they released a demo prior to this that is arguably even better than what's on the album. The demo came out in '87. The album didn't come out until 1990, so there's a few years in between. Only one track still made it onto the album. But yeah, excellent stuff. And I think I've got, a clip of one of the tracks from the demo over here. So let's give a quick listen to Just Before Dawn. All right, so yeah, definitely inspired by the Queensryche style of heavy metal and doing an excellent job of it. It's a shame that, they kind of got overlooked. All right, one last demo that I want to mention before we wrap things up for the evening is going to be the Charter to Nowhere demo by Canadian band Solar Eagle. Again, kind of an obscure one that didn't get a lot of attention. They did manage to release one EP. I don't have a physical copy of the demo. It has been reissued. You can get it and the EP on a reissue from just a couple of years ago. I don't have the reissue. All I've got is the original EP, which is shown here. This is one that used to be really hard to track down, but more and more copies have kind of trickled out. As recently as just 4 or 5 years ago, one of the band members had some unsold copies and put them on the collector's market. So you can get the originals a lot easier than you used to. You do have to watch out because this was bootlegged at one point. So if you want to get the old EP, be mindful of what you pay for. Because there is a total boot out there. You can just get the reissue that also has Charter to Nowhere on it. Solar Eagle. Rather than try to explain Solar Eagle, I'm just going to play a clip. This is actually going to cheat just a little bit and play one of the songs from the EP instead of the demo, because it's one of my favorite tracks by the band. So yeah, there's a little bit of the chaos that is Solar Eagle. They had a really crazy sound, but I really like it. Some people compare them to Agent Steel. There's a couple of similarities. They both have a lot of sort of sci-fi, fantasy, outer space themed lyrics. And the vocalist obviously has a little bit of that same sort of really high, almost shrill range that John Cirrus had. But Solar Eagle doesn't have that really hyper speed thrash metal leaning that classic Agent Steel had. They also share similarities with another Canadian band called Sacred Blade that did again these sort of weird oddball sci-fi themed lyrics. But Solar Eagle's tracks also vary from one another. They don't all sound the same. They did a song, A Dimension to Nowhere, that has this almost doomy, swirling kind of riff to it that just kind of very hypnotic and kind of like it's like you're getting sucked down into a whirlpool. They did a couple of songs that are a little bit more mellow in tone as well. This is a case where I think the record is actually better than the demo. Chartered and Aware as a demo is good. A few of the songs on it, though, stay in a little bit of that more restrained territory. Whereas the stuff they put on the EP, I feel like they let loose a little bit more. It's got a little bit more of that just, kind of manic sound to it. And it's a really cool sound. I think they did a good job with it. All right. I think I've shown about 12 demos. That's more than enough. Maybe we'll do this again sometime with some other demos. But now let's talk metal in the comments down below. What are some of your personal favorite demos? If you haven't responded to Devon, leave a message here or leave a message for both of us. It's a lot of great demos from throughout the ages out there. I, again, tend to know the older stuff a little bit more than the newer stuff. But if you like some old ones or you think there's some newer demos I should be checking out, by all means, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. All right, let's call this to an end. So until next time, folks, keep banging your heads.